Hey, it's Sela Social Studies.
Hey guys, welcome back to Sela Social Studies. Today we're going to be covering the Whiskey Rebellion. So during the Revolutionary War, the Continental Congress began promising to pay the soldiers in the form of something we called the Continental. Now the revolving issue was that the Continental was backed by a future promise of tax revenues. Now, after the Revolutionary War ended in 1781, Congress ratified the Articles of Confederation, a type of government that had some serious flaws. One of these flaws was the inability for the federal government to tax the states. After 8 years and trying and failing, the Constitutional Convention met and scrapped the Articles of Confederation, replacing them in 1789 with our current government, the Constitution. The same year, George Washington was elected President of the United States and inherited all the problems of building a new young nation. Washington knew that he could not take on and fix the problems himself, so he established the first presidential cabinet, making Thomas Jefferson the Secretary of State, Henry Knox the Secretary of War, Edmund Randolph the Attorney General, and most important to this narrative, Alexander Hamilton the Secretary of the Treasury. Hamilton was smart and had dealt with numbers for a long time, from his trading rum in the Caribbean and selling slaves for his father-in-law. Roughly 13 years after America gained its independence, the country was in some serious debt. Hamilton knew that he needed to figure out a way to create a self-supporting and efficient government. The question was, how was he going to do it? The government would need to tax something. But what? What did many men in the late 1700s do a lot of? Drink whiskey. Now, before we get started, we have to remember why the Revolutionary War started in the first place. Colonists were being sick of being taxed by King George III and Parliament, so the idea of taxing this whiskey would probably not go over too well, and sure enough, it didn't. But Hamilton knew he needed to find a steady source of revenue to save the nation. And in 1791, Congress instituted an excise tax on whiskey that was produced in the United States. This ultimately led to the Whiskey Rebellion. The whiskey tax infuriated the farmers in western Pennsylvania, who distilled and profited from the sale of whiskey. In July of 1794, an organized mob of farmers and whiskey distillers attacked and destroyed the home of a tax collector, as well as tarred and feathered that tax collector himself. The small-scale rebellion sparked concern within the presidential cabinet. Alexander Hamilton knew that if the rebellion grew, so did the chances of another revolution, and it needed to be stopped immediately. He also knew that in order to protect the young, fragile government, it had to prove to the nation that it was capable of keeping control within its borders. Alexander Hamilton advocated for the use of military force, but what would it tell or show the nation if the president sent the military after its own citizens? President Washington realized this. He put the state militias on the ready and sent negotiators in to disperse this rebellion. However, when negotiations stalled, Washington decided to try Hamilton's way next. Washington and Hamilton led a force of about 13,000 militia troops into western Pennsylvania. Now, by the time Washington and Hamilton arrived with the federal force, the rebellion collapsed and most of the protesters fled. Overall, only 2 men were charged with treason and would later be pardoned by President Washington. Hamilton was elated that the government had showed that it was able to protect itself and keep order in the new nation. Secretary Jefferson witnessed again how Hamilton was able to convince the president to side with him, dividing the president's cabinet even more. This is the only time in history that a sitting or current president led the army into a conflict. It also showed the people of America that the new form of government under the Constitution was strong and capable, not weak like they were under the Articles of Confederation. I'll see you next time.